There she is.
Hi,
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. As you can see, I've given up on my hair. Couldn't get
It's lockdown, isn't it? You've got to do what you can,
exactly, which is
or
just permanently put it up in a bun.
or not do what you can. It goes both
No,
ways, doesn't
exactly. You've got a very lucky hairdo going on.
it? Well, it's hard to keep short hair going, to be honest, but it's all right today.
And the wine.
Yeah,
And
the
the wine.
obligatory lockdown wine as
The
well.
lockdown wine. I need to have willpower with three kids, so I have a 5:30 every evening rule. If I can
Hmm.
get to 5:30 without pouring myself a glass, then it's a win.
That sounds good. Yeah, it's important to have a few days off as well.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, for anyone joining us now, we've got the infamous and famous, notorious Dr. Karen Gurney,
Notorious,
who,
I like that.
otherwise known as the Sex Doctor, and author of Mind the Gap, which we'll come to in a minute, and a clinical psychologist, very much specialising in sexual well-being. Am I right? Do you want to give a
That's
much better explanation of your background? Who are you?
right. So I'm a clinical psychologist and psychosexologist, and basically what that means is when I finished my training as a clinical psychologist about 17 years ago, I did my final year specialising in anything to do with sex. So
Yes.
since then, for the last 17 years, I've worked in sexual health and sexual problem services for the NHS, as well as setting up the Havelock Clinic, which is an independent sexual problems clinic I set up a couple of years ago. And basically, I spend all day, every day, talking with people, individuals, couples, in workshop format about getting a better sex life or overcoming sexual problems using therapy, sex therapy,
Yeah.
and different types of therapy. So that's what I do.
Nice. And having all that experience and years of it, what was the light bulb moment where you thought, I'm going to write this book and I need to write this book and I
Mm.
want to write this book?
So that was the book for off the chair. So there were two actually. One is that about 10 years ago, maybe a bit more, I did some additional training in a particular technique working with couples, basically, therapy technique. And one of the things that occurred to me is that I have the same conversations over and over and over again with women, with their partners in sessions. And basically, the problem is not always within them or within
Yeah.
their relationship, but rather in how we understand sex as a society. And it occurred to me that a lot of these problems could be solved if we address them on a wider level, not in the therapy room. And so I did a few things for the NHS a long time ago, kind of digital sex therapy tool and things like that, and they were very successful. And then when I started my Instagram account a few years ago and trying to kind of translate sex science and aspects of sex therapy in a way that could help people's day-to-day sex lives, I started to get contacted by a couple of publishers who said, this would be really good in a book. And I thought, oh yeah, that's the perfect way to do it, because
Yeah.
actually my Instagram account is all about trying to normalize, trying to talk about where gender politics comes into it, where kind of media and social media comes into it. And so it was the perfect marriage, I guess. And I was a little bit reluctant at first. I thought, I've not got time to write a book. But then once the seed had been planted,
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, got to do it.
No, and in the book as a whole, just brief, you sort of in a nutshell, what what is it about? I know there's the gap and there's the orgasm gap, and I mean there's so
Yeah.
many different kinds of gaps when it comes to, sex lives and everything. So in a nutshell, just sort of describe to people listening what the book
Yeah.
is.
So the book is essentially a book about desire in long-term relationships. It's about understanding the science of how desire works, which is frankly very different than how we're socialized to think desire works, and how to use that to your advantage to future-proof what I call future-proof your sex life. It's basically, how do you take everything we know from science about how to maintain desire, what fans the flames of desire, what keeps desire going? How do you take all that and apply it practically to your own sex life in a way that increases sexual satisfaction? So it's a book for women and their partners.
Yeah.
And it's basically a book for people whose sex lives couldn't be any better, and it's important to them that it stays that way, so they want to find out how to, as well as people who feel that they are lacking in desire. And I chose desire particularly because 34% of women in the UK are concerned about desire, feel they've got a problem with desire, which is massive. And it's the most common reason people seek sex therapy. And ironically, it's also one of the easiest things to resolve. And so it frustrated me that there was all of these people who are worried about their sex lives and whose relationships were not working out because of their concerns about desire, when actually there is so much that if they knew about desire, it might change the way they run their sex lives. So the gap, the title Mind the Gap, really refers to, obviously the orgasm gap is kind of widely popularized, and it does come into it to a small extent, but the gap really is about the gap between what we think we know about our sexuality, our sex lives, and what we could actually do with knowing to keep them good. So that's the gap I'm referring to in the book.
Yeah,
so
and with the whole desire chat, and I think especially for women, there's so much, the brain is our biggest sex organ, and it plays such a big part. And we are emotional roller coasters. Every day's different. And there's that, if you say desire, and you just think, shit, have I got no desire and no sex drive because I don't want to be ripping my partner's clothes off the whole time? It's sort of the other way around. It seems that it's, men are sort of slightly more straightforward in that they want it or don't want it. It's sort of that desire part of it. So what when you see couples, is a lot of it the female side a lot of the time thinking that they're just not turned on, they've got something wrong with them because they're not wanting to rip their partner's clothes off the whole time. What's your experience on all that side?
Okay, so the gender thing is actually really interesting because there are two very contrasting things that happen with gender. One is that we're not as different as we think, and that desire operates in a very similar way for people of all genders. But another fascinating aspect of it is that people who identify as women find it harder to maintain desire for a partner in the long term compared to people who identify as men. So what we know is that for women, it's harder to maintain desire for the same one person over time. And we don't know why that is. There's
an animal thing.
Yeah, it potentially is. And there's a lot of kind of anthropological studies around that. But what we do know is that desire changes in a long-term relationship, in a monogamous long-term relationship. And that for women particularly, it can feel that desire has completely left the room or is very rarely there after the first year or two of being together. And this is not actually the problem. The problem is that we just don't understand desire because there are different types of desire, and the desire we have at the beginning is a very difficult desire to maintain, but there are other types of desire that we can nurture. The problem is because we're expecting the desire from the beginning, people tend to just kind of wait to feel desire. Because we've been socialized to think of it that way, like a sex drive, like a hunger.
And that passion, you just want to rip their clothes off.
And the reality is that that for many women, not all, but many women in long-term relationships, is just not realistic. And it's actually normal for women to never feel like it out of the blue once they've been with a partner for a couple of years. And men don't have that as much. A lot of men still concerned about their desire. 15% in the UK feel they're never interested in sex. But on the whole, there is a bit of a difference in that men can maintain that desire for a partner more easily.
But on that front, it kind of, that whole sort of society and what you hear a lot about in society is that it's more men that have affairs. It's more men who are they wander, but when you talk about it that way, it kind of appears like, well, it should be the other way around.
That's right. And there's another brilliant book by Wednesday Martin called Untrue.
She's great, Wednesday Martin.
Yeah, and her book is all about how actually the thing that stops women being having the same infidelity rate as men is not their desire, it's the social restrictions around it. So financial restrictions, the moral restrictions,
Yeah.
the ways in which we've been socialized lead us to have the rates of infidelity as we do. But yeah, no, it's not the case. It's if you think about all of the straight monogamous long-term relationships that you know,
Yeah.
it's more likely that it's the women in those relationships that are struggling to feel interested in sex with that partner.
Yeah. It's true though. If I look at a lot of, my, friends who've been in long-term relationships, you speak to the girls and it's sort of a bit of a, a joke, a lie, they joke about, oh, lying there and taking it, just, when needed. It's a huge thing. And some of them will say, some friends of mine who've been in a relationship longer than sort of 10, 15, sometimes 20 years, would just say they would quite happily never have sex.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that, I know it sounds odd to say this, but that is a normal representation of how desire is in a long-term relationship, in that people often say, I could take it or leave it. I never think about it. That in itself is quite normal. But what's also normal is women saying, I never really feel like it, but once we have sex, it's great. And I say to my partner, we should do that more often. And that's another representation of how desire tends to work, which is that once you kind of start, arousal comes. And one of the things I think that's important is around all the different kind of contexts that influence desire. And because we've been socialized to think of it as this kind of sex drive that we should just feel like we feel hunger, and people are waiting for it to happen, it's also really difficult for people to pay attention to the contexts around desire in their sex life as well, that be helping or hindering it. So, for example, one of the things that's really terrible for desire is predictability and lack of novelty. And it can be really difficult when you're having sex with the same person over time to bring in elements of difference. It's not impossible, of course it isn't, but it can be challenging, can't it? And we know that couples that tend to have the same type of sex every time they have sex tend to see a negative knock-on effect on especially female desire. And also things that you wouldn't really think about. So the research tells us that couples that have a very unequal division of household labor. So if it's a straight couple, and we can talk about same-sex couples as well if we want later on, but a lot of the research has been done with opposite-sex couples. If you have unequal division of labor, the person that does most of the household admin usually.
So can I stop you a minute? People are asking if they can ask questions. Yeah, if you whack the questions in, and you can ask questions. So far away. Yeah, sorry, carry on. Yeah.
It's always hard to see the questions, isn't it?
I know.
So basically what I'm saying is things that people often don't think of as having an effect on their desire, like who puts the bins out and whether that's divided equally, or whether one person bears the brunt of that, which we know is usually women in a straight relationship. Those things have a massive effect on desire in a way that you wouldn't really think that they would. So there are lots of things to unpick around desire, but the key thing is that, and this is something I feel really passionately about, everybody can have whatever amount of desire they want in their relationship. They're not at the mercy of their desire. They don't have a sex drive that's just their sex drive, like, oh, I've got a low sex drive, or they've got a high sex drive. There's no such thing. Desire doesn't operate like that. It's completely relevant. It's completely based around context, and you can turn it up or turn it down depending on the context. And I guess that's why I wanted to write the book, because I wanted people to know that they're not at the mercy of it. They don't have to put up with how their desire is operating if they're not happy with it.
Yeah, someone just said, why do gender roles have such a big effect on desire? Is that what? Yeah.
That's a good question. It's a big question as well. So if we think about gender rather than biological sex, there are some biological sex differences, namely the amount of circulating testosterone, but they're not as big as you might think, because there is a considerable overlap between some women and some men in that way. So let's forget about biological sex and just think about gender, i.e. how we're socialized. So we know that men are socialized to be more sexually assertive, to think about sex more, to talk about sex more, and for that there's more of a sex permissible society for men. Now that's not always a great thing for men, because a lot of men feel
a lot of pressure on them,
that doesn't fit for them. But at the same time, that's one of the key reasons why we have the orgasm gap. So the orgasm gap, everyone knows does everyone know what that is, or do I need to talk about that?
Explain briefly. A lot of people do, and actually I'm quite surprised at the lack of people don't know about that.
So many research studies, big scale research studies, have shown us that the orgasm gap exists, which basically means that when women and men have sex together, men orgasm roughly 95% of the time, usually or always, and women orgasm about 65% of the time. Women who have sex with women, there's much less of an orgasm gap. And we know that when women and men masturbate separately, they can reach orgasm at the same rate, 98% of the time, in the same number of minutes. So basically, the orgasm gap refers to what happens when men and women have sex together, which is women's pleasure suffers. And it's not a biological thing, it's a way in which sex happens. So this is important when it comes to gender roles, because women, of course, women are raised to not be so assertive, to please others, to put other people's needs first, to not appear sexually, aggressive. These are all things I disagree with, obviously. But these are been shown to be true in terms of sexual scripts in society. And what that means is that men tend to get what they want from sex more than women do, especially in casual sex, when the orgasm gap widens to a ridiculous 18% of women orgasming and still 95% of men.
Well, it's because a lot of women and don't orgasm just through penetration, and it's just that assumption that they do. And also there's that, as you said, with women kind of wanting to please and not wanting the man to feel bad, is you fake it, so that so the gap's huge.
And as you say, only 80% of women, only 20% of women, I should say, 80% can't, only 20% of women can orgasm from penetrative sex alone, and we know that women fake orgasms roughly 55 to 60% of the time. So gender roles and desire are also bound up in who gets the most pleasure from sex, because of course we have sex, we do anything in life, we're motivated to do anything when we're rewarded for doing it, and sex is one of those things. So if you're the person that when you have sex you always get your needs met, then of course sex will hold more weight to you and you'll be inclined to seek it out. So that's just one of the reasons that gender roles comes in, but I mean there are so many. It's fascinating, actually.
So do you get a lot of are most of your clients couples and trying to get that gap, or one feeling just feeling unbalanced?
So my clients are probably split 50-50, individuals and couples, and a mix of gay and straight couples as well. And part of the work is often helping both people see what's happening in sex for the other one. And sex is the most fascinating thing to do therapy around, because there are so many different cultural ideas, there are so many misconceptions, there are so many assumptions that people make about even their partner who they've been with for many
Hang on 1 second. Raymond James 28, can you repeat your question? You just asked to respond to your question, but I can't see the question. So type it again and I'll spot it. But you carry on, Karen. Okay. Sorry.
You get about 2 seconds to see it.
I know.
Now I'm on tenterhooks waiting for the question. And a lot of it is around how difficult we find it to talk about sex in society. So a lot of therapy is about doing that. It's about helping people spot what's going on before you can help them do something about it. And bringing in a lot of the facts about sex, which often people don't know. People often make a lot of assumptions.
So what are some of the big? I know. Where's the question? I know. What are some of the big assumptions that people would, and what's your advice on those assumptions?
So Um, the biggest assumption, the two biggest ones that I think are so big that they're almost hard for people to spot, and people almost don't believe it when you suggest it might not necessarily be the case, is that sex is not a penis and a vagina.
Shock.
I know. But that is really difficult for a lot of people, and they're just like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Of course it is. Like, what's the point of everything else? But it's really big, that, for some people. And of course, you know, that is also an interesting one, because we know that, again, another bit of research tells us that people who have penis and vagina sex for every type of sex that they have tend to have less sexual satisfaction than people who don't. So it's also not great for us to see sex that way either. So that's one. The second, which is a really interesting one, is that monogamy is natural for humans. And that's a really fascinating one for me, because there's not any evidence to back it up. And it also really connects to moral ideas about infidelity, you know.
Yeah.
It's bad people that cheat and blah blah blah, and that open relationships don't work, and none of those things are true, but that's really caught up in that belief.
Yeah. And in I was going to get to the sort of lockdown and desire now. Are you what are your tips, and you've probably got lots of sort of virtual couples and couples you're treating over Skype or Zoom or whatever, you know, at the moment. And what advice do you have for couples? You know, I'm in lockdown with my husband, 3 children, you know, and there's lots of me out there like that. And when you're used to having your own lives, having the space, having your, you know, where you come and go and stuff. What are you seeing in couples now? And what's your advice to couples out there?
Okay,
wanting
so
to kill each other?
yeah, how long have you got?
Yeah.
But the first place to start, I guess, is by talking about the impact of anxiety on people's desire to be sexual. And that can go in either direction. And that's the first thing to recognize, is that there'll be a group of people who are listening to this perhaps, or watching it, for whom worry about the current situation. And of course, there's a lot of things to worry about, aren't there? In all kinds of worry about that will have taken any want or desire for sex completely off the table for them. And that's entirely normal, and one of the ways in which our sex lives are affected, and to not worry about it. That would be one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is there are plenty of people for whom sex is a way to manage anxiety, and a way to connect, and a way to feel calm, and a way to connect with others. And so for those people, their desire for sex and expression of their sexuality may go up. So the first thing I often recommend to people who are in lockdown with a partner is it's important to know which of those the two of you are. So to know that about each other is the first place, and to talk about it. It might be that there's 2 of you sat at home who actually think we've got a bit more time on our hands, particularly those who don't have kids at home. And maybe, you know, we're both feeling up for it a bit more. Let's use this as an opportunity. And I'll talk about how you can use it as an opportunity. And then there are loads of couples at home that are like, this is the last thing from our
They're
mind.
opposites. Someone's just come in saying we're opposites. And
maybe they just need to acknowledge that and go, let's not worry about it. I know we feel we should be, because we're at home, we've got all this time, but let's not worry about it. And then that will be the solution for them. And then there's a third group for whom one person's has gone up and the others has gone down, and the discrepancy is wider than usual. Those people really need to talk about it, because a discrepancy in how much you want to be having sex is often a bigger problem than how much you want to be having sex. And it's solved very easily by discussing it and understanding what needs sex is meeting, and how you can try and meet that other ways, etc. So depending on the scenario, we might do different. But let's imagine for a second that we have 2 people that think, actually, we're in lockdown together and we do want to prioritize our sexual relationship. It's important for us to keep it going, or to have more. For those people, there'd be a few things that I would suggest. The first is that it would be important to make sure that you still have time throughout the day to connect to each other as sexual partners, even if it's not that many minutes throughout the day. So one of the things that often happens when we're with a partner after a couple of months or after a year or so is that we dilute the role that we have with them as a sexual partner, and we dilute that role because we become maybe housemates or we become parents. And so we see each other as a co-parent, we see each other as a housemate, we see each other as a friend, and yeah, we also see each other as a sexual partner, but that role as a sexual partner has been diluted. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
You look back on your texts, for example. Texts are a great example of this.
Yeah.
You can probably see all of these roles in your text messages. Like, can you pick up milk? How are the kids today? They're all non-sexual ways of relating.
That's pretty, all my texting now is pretty much that.
Yeah, I think most of them. But if you think about the texts you had at the beginning with each other, they were much more sexually charged.
Mm.
And that's what I call sexual currency. And it's important to keep sexual currency up in a relationship. And it doesn't have to take a big amount of your day. It doesn't have to be a big ordeal, but it's just about making sure you prioritize relating to each other in that way. So it could be, you know, a kind of a passionate kiss that you have very quickly as you pass each other in the kitchen for a couple of seconds. It could be that while you're both working from home on your separate emails, you send your partner an email saying they look hot today or whatever it might be. It's just little ways of remembering that they're also your sexual partner and trying to connect them in that way. And sexual currency is important for two reasons. One is because once we see someone as a sexual person, we tend to feel more desire towards them. So couples that get out of the habit of kissing, for example, passionate kissing outside of sex, it can be really difficult to transition back into that again.
Yeah, because kissing is so underrated, and there's a lot of, when you speak to people about it, there's a lot of couples who just, will go, well, we just stop kissing,
Exactly.
we're having sex, we just don't kiss anymore. And I remember, being a teenager, when you got off with people, it was the be all and end all, it was the thing, the only thing.
And kissing's actually really hot, and it's something that if there was one tip that I could suggest to all couples that will revolutionize their sex life, it would be take time to kiss.
Yeah.
It's what you do at the beginning of a relationship a lot, and that's why you have lots and lots of sex. And it's also what I call a kind of scaffold to move you up to something more sexual. So it's easier to kind of move up to something else once you've got that baseline of relating to each other that way. And the other thing with kissing and with any type of sexual currency, sexual currency for me is anything that's not sex, but you wouldn't do with like your auntie.
Yeah.
So anything that's flirty, anything that's sexual, a text that says, do you remember when we did this? A suggestive look, a passionate kiss, it's all being naked together.
Can I just stop a minute? Someone keeps asking the same question. I saw your question. It was about whether you've got an older woman who's been trying to jump you, but she's actually your boss's wife, and you want advice. I would say stay the fuck away from her.
I bow to your expert advice on that.
Okay. Anyway, carry on.
I love that. So sexual currency is important because it provides that scaffold, and it also means we're relating to each other as sexual partners, which is really good for our sex life. But it's also important because it provides a way to take away that awkwardness around initiation. So a lot of what I see with couples who aren't so happy with their sex lives is that there's zero sexual currency throughout the day or week or month, and then one partner will suddenly kiss the other partner, and because it's so unusual, the partner that's being kissed will go, whoa,
it's 0 to 100.
I know what they want, and I'm not feeling desire right now, so I'm just going to put a stop to it because I don't want to give them the wrong idea. And the irony is that desire works the complete opposite way, which is that desire needs sexual currency. And when you have sexual currency, desire follows. And we know that desire follows just as easily for men as it does for women with sexual currency.
Yeah.
So what that means is if you have frequent kisses and frequent sexual currency, desire will be kick-started. Not every time, because sometimes you'll be busy thinking about that meeting you've got on Zoom in the next hour. But a lot of the time it will. But the risk is the less you have, the more when it does happen, you go, I know what they're after. And you off, because pressure is terrible for desire. So lots of sexual currency for people that are stuck at home. That would be one of my key things. The other is to not spend every night watching Netflix.
Yeah.
Which is very easy to fall into.
So easy, especially when there's things like this Tiger King, which we're hooked on.
I just finished that.
We're on the last one. I'm like, well, I've got about 20 minutes left, and I realised it was 8:30, and I'm like, I can't go. We've got to watch it after.
It's madness. It's pure madness, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. So to do that, and you know, as kind of cheesy as it sounds, it's important to nurture that aspect of your relationship while you're stuck at home together, because whether it's lockdown or not, especially the people who've got kids and don't have easy access to a babysitter, it can be very easy to not have much quality time with someone that you live with. It can be very easy to sit side by side watching Netflix and scrolling Instagram.
Yeah.
Generally,
you're my husband.
I've seen a window into your life. Generally, it's good to do that. Of course it is. But to maybe have once a week, once a month, doesn't matter how often, of a time to say, let's go to bed and just lie in bed naked and talk about our day, talk about how we're feeling, talk about whatever, kiss, be together. It's those times where desire flourishes.
Yeah, and do you think that, well, in isolation now, because you mentioned like the three types of couples, and I mean probably the hardest one is the type where you've got one person who and wants more, the desire is up when they're anxious, and on that front, and the other one is the complete opposite. So what advice do you have on those couples, because there's probably a lot of those kind of couples out there?
Okay, so that middle couple where one of them's gone up and one of them's gone down, there are a couple of things here. If it wasn't for lockdown, then I might suggest that it might be useful for them to consider this as something which could be good to address for the longer term relationship, because partly that's why I wrote the book, because discrepancy is really normal. It's about 25% of couples at least have a very different idea of how much sex they should be having, and it often causes a lot of problems. But so if for those couples outside of lockdown, I'd say do something about it, because it can cause an issue, and it doesn't need to. In lockdown, I would say it's just about understanding what needs sex is meeting. So again, that idea that that sex drive is the thing that's driving us all, some kind of physical itch that we need to scratch that just appears out of nowhere. That idea sometimes masks the fact that we all want to have sex for psychological and relational needs. So there are actually 237 documented reasons why humans have sex. And they range from everything from to feel wanted, to make up, to out of boredom, to feel alive, to feel excited, to feel pleasure, to get pregnant. There are a million
angry sex.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are 237 reasons. And one of the things that I often encourage people to do is to reflect on what their key motivations often are. So there are usually 2 or 3 back over your sex life. You think, why did I want to be sexual at that time? And usually you can see a pattern that starts to emerge for you. And then if you get your partner to do that, you can discuss that together. And it can be things like, you sometimes like to have, especially for these couples who are like this in lockdown, one of them might find that they feel the desire to have sex when they feel really stressed. And that's why it's gone up. And so knowing that about yourself, and if you're the other partner, knowing that about your partner, not only makes you more sympathetic when they're going, can we have sex? It's been ages since we had sex, but also helps both of you think about how you can meet that need in another way if that partner doesn't want to have sex.
Does that link into the whole 5, the 5 languages? Is it 5 languages of love? The different ways?
Yeah. 5 languages. Yeah. So a bit like that, it can be useful to think about what that person's need actually is and how it can be met. And this is where men often have a bit of a disservice, actually, because I think there's often an idea that because these gender roles that we talked about earlier, the way in which men are socialized is that, you know, men are
Yeah.
thinking about sex every 7 seconds, you know, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
It often reduces men's want for sex as being just about this kind of physical urge. And actually, a lot of the men that I talk to in therapy, you know, when I'm there with them and their partners, and I say, "What was it that made you
Yeah.
want to be sexual at that time?" They'll say, "I just want to know that they still fancy me, or I just want to feel close, or I just wanted to feel connected, or I just wanted to feel loved," or whatever it might
Yeah.
be. And often hearing that can either be the thing that makes the other partner think, well, maybe let's see where we get to with this. Actually, I feel a bit more sympathetic now.
Yeah.
Or it makes them think, okay, well, let me show you that in another way. Sex is completely off the cards for me because I'm so stressed about coronavirus. But let me show you that you're loved. Let me tell you that you're attractive. So it's just another way to negotiate that.
Okay, cool. So before we end, has anyone got any, have you got any last minute questions, then write them in there. But just quickly, actually, you're still very much working, aren't you?
I am.
You said today you're involved with the NHS today. So what's that work at the moment?
So I work for 5016 Street in Soho, which is a sexual health clinic, and we are very much running an emergency only service at the moment. And I'm seeing some clients over Zoom and things, but we have had a proportion of our doctors and nurses and health advisors have gone to Nightingale,
Okay.
and we're all just kind of trying to keep the service going and maybe waiting for a next draft people to go to Nightingale. We don't really know
Yeah.
yet what's going to happen there. But I'm very proud to work for the NHS. I'm very proud of all my colleagues, and
Amazing.
it's good to be able to get out the house.
Yeah, you lucky cow.
We had 2 weeks of isolation with the kids because they had symptoms.
Oh, wow.
That was a really hard 2 weeks. So I feel for you with 3 because I've got 2, and that was hard enough.
Yeah, but you know what? We're very lucky. We've got outdoor space, and
Oh,
the sun has been out for the whole of isolation, hasn't it? So, do you know
true.
what? Every time I want to throw one of them through a window, I go, it could be way worse. We're safe at home. So, yeah, exactly. But anyway, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us. And if anyone's got any other questions, then just there's the book as well, Mind the Gap. Amazing book, and it's amazing for women and men. So of any age, just get out and read it.
Any sexuality.
Any sexuality, exactly. Or just stalk Karen on Instagram and just send her loads of messages direct. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you to you and the rest of
Thank
Killing
you.
Kittens.
And good luck with your work.
Thank you.